Hey, hello everybody. My name is Robert Dunt and I'm the founder of Art Top 10. And here I am today with the wonderful curator Rosalind Davis, who's about to give us a very interesting tour of her latest exhibition, Strangelands.
Hi, I'm Rosalind and I'm the curator here at Collyer Bristow Gallery. Collyer Bristow Gallery is a curated exhibition space within a law firm in Holborn, in central London. And this is my fourth show here. I'm an artist myself as well as a curator, and this is Strangelands.
Oh, that's cool. Well, it's exciting. I'm looking forward to it. So you said there was like a poem that might set the scene.
Yeah, so the show has kind of been in conception for about a year.
Okay, wow.
And when I was writing to the artists, I was telling them about the themes of the show, and eventually that became a poem.
Oh really? Oh, you wrote it?
Yeah.
Oh wow,
yeah.
cool, even better.
Yeah.
Nice
So it was sort of started with this idea of "These are extraordinary times," which was a quote by Dan Rather the day after the American election. So that's kind of the first line, and then the rest is the poem. So it starts. These are extraordinary times of unanchored worlds, ruptured spaces, fabricated and dislocated places, alternative languages, signs and systems, confusions of reality and fictions. Here are the dispossessed and the reinvented, the unfathomable, the inexplicable, the vampires, visitors and hoodlums. These are strange lands.
Very cool, very nice, I like it.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yes, a new curatorial kind of thing that's emerged.
We're going to start, we have to have a poem for each show.
Yeah, but it really encompasses the whole feel of the show, you know, and you'll see as we kind of go through the hoodlums and the vampires, and to have that real otherworldliness as well that I was trying to express.
Well, there's quite an otherworldliness in some of these pictures here, like there's this one here that I like that's always on the front of the brochure. But do you want to tell us a little bit about this artist?
Yeah, so this is Cristina de Middel's work, and this is a series called the Afronauts, which is part of a self-publicised book that she, or self-publication essentially, that she created out of this story, a true story, in 1964 of a man who set up a Zambian kind of space research centre.
Well, like a fake one or a real one?
No, a real one. And basically he was going to catapult these Afronauts to space with a cat. And,
cool.
Yeah. And so this is her imaginings of what this training was like, you know, and you can see actually original footage of the Afronauts training and the man that was running it talking about it. So so
this is not like archive stuff. This is her recreation of what she imagined would have happened.
Sort of what does that story really look like? And so, you know, it was part of a much bigger exhibition at the Photographers Gallery. An element that I really like about this work is that she kind of self-published the Afronauts as a book, and thinking and kind of bought, you know, kind of published these books, but wasn't sure what was going to happen with them. And,
of course.
You had boxes of books of the Afronauts, and then it got picked up on and noticed, and she was supported by some photographers, and it just took off and had a sort of very stratospheric kind of aspect. And
very cool.
Really thrilled that she's here, and we can show a section of the installation. So she devised how this should all look, and you know, we just emailed and set it up together.
Oh, cool! It's got very much that sense of the poem of sort of strange lands.
Yeah. So at the beginning, you've got the question, which is from Kabundu Kaongo, Ministry of Technology, asking NASA for some resources to train, and then, which is quite a long letter. It's about, you know, what he wants to do, having the first coloured woman on Mars, and to feed her 10 cats who will be her companions. And then the answer is very much like, good luck with that. Sorry, no. Very official kind of thing. You know, and I think that's kind of, as well, the aspect of starting with a dream and that kind of sort of falling apart of that belief in something.
Okay. But there's something weird and exciting that comes out of it, isn't there?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
It still has a sort of...
It's very resonant. I remember the work so powerfully, you know, 3 years later. You know, it's just such a great opportunity to show it again in London.
Cool. And so the last exhibition, I remember when you showed me around, it sort of flowed rather nicely. It had a sort of experiential
Yeah.
moment. So do you want to take us on that sort of experiential tour?
Yeah. Well, the show is the gallery is quite large, so we travel right through the space. But it's planned for placing every work to be in relationship, and so you kind of come on a journey. And in this front area, there are the Afronauts. There's the alien family. There is Golem, who is a mythical figure in Jewish mythology, and it's not actually a photograph, it's actually an image that has been printed that's hundreds of...
What, fractals is it? Or?
No, it's screenshots.
Oh, screenshots, joined together?
Yeah, so it's hundreds and hundreds of screenshots that have been created together. It basically started with a glitch in the programming that they were using, and this emerged. And so this is Gibson Martelli, I should say, and they're a collaborative art partnership. And Ruth is a dancer, and Bruno works with the VR, and they do a lot of VR, so virtual reality work and interactive work. So this is an extension of that, and it's kind of exciting to show another aspect of their work, which they developed specifically for another exhibition, and so it's great.
That's really cool. And when you get up to it, it changes completely,
and the turning away, it's actually Ruth, that's part of the duo, that's her figure kind of turning away in a dance. But again, I think that's the wonderful thing of things emerging from a glitch, essentially in software, that then you think, actually that's not a mistake, that's a real kind of something that catches your eye and you think you can build on. So it's between a landscape and a person. It's sort of that evolving, the evolution, and whether that's going to turn to man or I guess a part of a cliff, one doesn't know.
And the software getting more humanity in its glitchiness in some ways.
Well, quite.
As it changes.
And the aspects of portrait then relate to Ben Cove's work here, which is again person as architecture and sculpture as well.
Cool.
And an evolving portrait, I suppose. So this is trans, and it's based on the Rickfield chair. So Ben Cove works a lot with architecture. He trained as an architect, and then he went to Goldsmiths. And so those elements,
first, and then went to be an artist.
Sometime after. And so it's really about that relationship between art and architecture, and modernism and postmodernism. But it's also, there's lots of different elements of the kind of the leaning, and also in relationship to Ben himself. Ben was in a wheelchair, and there's a kind of markation of where his head might have been, his the arms, and then his feet. So there's kind of that other markation. So it's very kind of architectural and about art, but it's also about Ben himself.
And it's quite strange that you've got like these little fragile cuts into it, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean it's incredibly. It looks fragile, but it is just standing there propped on these.
Oh really?
Yeah.
That's quite cool.
The only thing secured is the painting. And so at the bottom, it's like this kind of tippy toes.
Yeah, you got little tippy toes. Yeah, it's got a.
So it's kind of an amazing balance as well of sort of proportions and materiality as well.
Very cool. Moving on through the exhibition, there's another great piece of work here by Ben Cove, and it just so happens that along with Rosalind, we've also got Justin Hibbs, who's another artist, and he knows quite a lot about Ben. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also an artist. Consider myself a contemporary of Ben's. We were in exhibitions together. I also curated the work with another artist friend of ours, David Ben White, into an exhibition, the work Trans, that we've just seen. And this was one of the last works of Ben's that was exhibited in his very last solo show. And I think it's a kind of, in a way, almost an anchor point in this show. And a really important piece of work in the middle here that kind of articulates a lot of the ideas going on in Strangelands.
Do you want to tell me a little bit more about it, maybe? I mean, as a quick look, you've got, I guess you've got what looks like, I suppose, sort of political police things taking place in the background. Yeah, do you want to fill me in on a bit of
Ben's work deals a lot with language and the kind of idea of misinterpretations that might occur between the kind of intention of a work and its reception.
Okay.
And in a sense, I think when Ros was thinking about this show Strangelands, it made a lot of sense because there's no way of avoiding the fact with this work that you have to kind of negotiate, well, what's going on here?
Yeah.
There's a kind of dislocation between this image of a kind of police scuffle or a riot or a protest and then these artworks, and you're kind of thrown into having to work out, how do we assimilate these different things that are happening simultaneously, and how do you read these images when they're placed directly on a photograph like this. So it's a kind of, I think that's something that's quite interesting about Ben's work is there's a kind of mischievousness about it, but a kind of serious mischievousness. It's not glib.
You're right.
And he's kind of getting you to question what it means to view a work or be a spectator, or if you look at the painting there.
Exactly, and it's an extraordinary little painting. I mean, it's beautifully painted. It's got a sort of 3D architectural bit, and it's got almost like a sort of little pink doily bits dangling down off it, hasn't it?
I mean, if you take the painting itself, it's really fascinating because, as you said, it there's a kind of collision of different languages occurring. So, modernism, postmodernism. There's references to classical architecture, but more than that, there's other issues going on about what constitutes good and bad taste. There are uneasy bedfellows occurring here. And I suppose, the paintings aren't wholly abstract either. They're kind of,
not at all,
there's representational elements, and there's, the overall image is kind of abstract. And so there's a kind of...
it's like a sort of strange car or even like a chairlift or something, a mountain.
I mean, the painting's called Ad Lib, but I see it as a portrait of Ben. I have no idea whether that's...
Well, we both do, actually.
You both do?
I mean, it kind of really reminds me of Ben, because sadly Ben passed away last year. And he's somebody I'd curated in shows before, and I met him through actually exhibiting trance that then went on to Justin's exhibition. So it's kind of significant to have that work, but there is something very Ben-like about that kind of his kind of energy and his drive and his cleverness and his wit, all in that, so it's kind of fantastic to show him and keep getting his work out there. It's a really important for me to be able to do that.
I mean, I think in terms of this show as well, when you're presented with one of Ben's installations, they're kind of slightly dizzying.
Exactly.
And there's this sense of, a disconnectedness of different elements, and that sense of kind of estrangement, I think, is quite important for this show.
Well, it becomes, the whole idea as well becomes relevant again in the context of our time. So a lot of the work here wasn't created for this show, but in the context of where we are in the world right now, politically, economically, socially, geographically, environmentally, they have a whole different range of meanings and layers in that context. That's a kind of wonderful thing as well.
No, it's really cool. No, it's a really good work. It's fascinating. I mean, you definitely want to see what's underneath. This picture.
This is quite an important feature of the work, that you don't get to see the key moment in the image.
You don't, do you?
And this is kind of, the works do provoke more questions. And I think that's really important.
And I guess if we head on down into the rest of the thing, we will find more questions coming for us. Right, so we're just wandering down now into what I would call the sort of main section of the gallery, and we'll come around here, we'll come to look back at these things, but here we are again with Rosalind and Justin, and I think on the right, I think Rosalind, actually, you're going to tell us a little bit about these three bits of work. They sort of relate to each other.
Well, the conversation carries on with this sort of modernism and architectural themes to the works of Richard Perry here,
very nice.
which is, it kind of plays as with perceptual experience in terms of the nature of shadow and interplay within the sculpture.
Very cool.
And this is called Folly. And it's placed here literally so that the relationship it has with Justin's work and how you look through the space from Richard's into Justin's and their relationship between form and texture and space, as well as the kind of wonderful blue backdrop. And also we kind of lit this, so if you look at the shadows, it's about that illusion and creating more spaces within space that isn't there.
It's very nicely lit. If you go around, you do get that sense of the different shadows and the different spaces within it. It's really cool, actually.
And he talked about it as well in terms of world events and how when you're making an artwork, you are absorbing all of that information, you are feeling a lot of things, and that may not be, the outcome is not something that's overtly political or saying a political message, but when you're making a work, you are absorbing those, and that somehow becomes very, very resonant with the artist, with the works that they're making.
That's interesting.
Yeah, which leads to you and your disunited states.
Yeah,
go on, Justin, tell us about that.
Well, that was interestingly when Rosalind was developing this show, which has been, it's kind of a conversation that's been going on for maybe a year.
Okay.
And I think it's gone through a few different sort of formations, as it were. But there was a point at which, when you settled on the title Strangelands, that I think really kind of instigated something for me. And it was just at the particular time that that happened, and I was aware that the title Strangelands was also a reference to a sort of novel that was written in 1961 called Stranger in a Strange Land.
Okay.
And so I was aware of that novel and the story of it and this reference to it in the title for this show.
Okay.
But something really resonated with me because at the time it was around the time of the US election.
Yeah.
And I kind of had that very strange sense of being a stranger in my own land or the world. Like a lot of people I think have felt in recent times, that they're kind of, the world events or political events, social events that are going on are very hard to rationalise.
Absolutely,
And so I kind of really connected with that idea of an estrangement and a sense of estrangement that was going on, and how, a kind of question arose for me about how, with all these things going on, how you might deal with that in the making of your work, or how you might acknowledge it even, you kind of go to the studio and you're off on your own. And then thinking, well, how can you begin to think about these things or bring these things in as a theme? So this work was made specifically for this show, and in a way responding to the title of the show.
Okay, and responding to those things. So how are they made?
Well, they're made, I started with, it literally came from the newspaper days after Trump's election, and I realised that I'd become a kind of complete news junkie, like an obsessive, to the news, reading the newspaper. And after the election, I'd kind of read this special, weekend special edition coverage. It's like 18 pages of the newspaper, and there were these. I still felt, the world didn't make sense after all this, and I began cutting up these red striped motifs that ran across the top and the bottom of the newspaper.
Okay. But they were like worded motifs, were they?
No, they're just printed lines
just
related
the
to the American flag.
Okay.
And I began to just cut those up. I began to reconfigure them. I began to kind of dissect them, to kind of rebuild them into fractured patterns.
And wait, are these them? Or?
No, they're not.
I
began to take these patterns and put them onto layers and acetate layers, and then I began to think about what they should be kind of printed on. So they're kind of like monoprints, but built layer by layer, line by line.
Okay. Line by line?
Well, in some cases, there are just a few lines added, but it's kind of one shape at a time.
Okay, very cool.
And, I have a kind of fascination as well for I don't know, just the low-grade quality of like newsprint.
Like
the possibility
absolutely.
for, I don't know, misprints or misregistration, that kind of very lo-fi printing.
Yeah.
And so I kind of began to think that an appropriate way to think about this was printing. And I think another important thing was I made a choice to print these onto this kind of very old antique
I noticed the paper. I noticed the paper. It is because you can see it's got a sort of brownish tinge at the top, and it's sort of. It's actually.
You can see a lot of marks.
Is it high quality old paper or just sort of?
It came from a French
or?
ledger book, yes, from
ledger book.
the 1870s.
Yeah, very nice.
And the thing is, when I acquired these pages, and they were covered in these marks, this kind of accumulated history. So there's bits of sellotape, there's glue marks, there's
very nice.
the kind of traces where there had been other things stuck in the book. And in a way, I thought that it was a kind of really apt surface to work on because it had this accumulated history.
We're very apt for the thing you're doing, absolutely.
But then I kind of realised that if I were to print on these pieces of paper, in a way, there would be an impact on the final result, that I would get unintentional flaws and imperfection.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a very important part of this, in a way, that those flaws and imperfections, or that feeling of disconnection, becomes a part of the work. And so, in a way, the materials here and the process are really a way of thinking about those things, and a way of kind of communicating those ideas.
So once you'd made them, did you feel any more or less disconnected to world events?
No.
Did it make you feel any different about them?
I think what it does is it provides another way of thinking about these things, and another space to think about them.
Okay.
And in a way, so some of those decisions then would inform the way that this work is installed. So I was really keen to have a blue wall, so we ended up with something that's this kind of discoloured, aged white, red and blue. It's back to the
Very
flag.
nice. Very nice.
And so, although the work can look, I work with abstraction, and the work might look kind of elegant or have a kind of beautiful aesthetic, there are other things that guide the decision-making process.
Sure.
So in this case, it was trying to deal with how the outside world and how you might feel about it, and that sense of estrangement or discombobulation that I felt could be a way of informing a work or creating a work.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting actually, that they are works. They do have a little sense. I mean, there's a sense of sort of rupture or things falling on top of each other or breaking against each other. They're really good, and I love the paper actually. The paper really adds to the whole effect of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what's really important is that sense as well with the paper, that there's a strange kind of dislocation in time. So this paper is, from the mid 1870s. And then I'm adding to this history, but these things, the one history and the other aren't necessarily fully accepting of each other.
Yeah.
And so that's quite important.
Oh yeah, no, because it sounds a bit cheeky, but it's almost like Trump sort of destroying history. There's a little sense of you tweaking and destroying a bit of history back there in the past with that ledger book.
I think in a way, when you make something like this, I was completely absorbed in just making the work, but when you stand back and look, I'm suddenly aware of the relationship to the flag and this idea of fracturing.
Yeah.
And so it's not, you're not thinking, oh, can I remake a flag? But the material comes from there, and that idea of fracturing comes from there, and it is sort of underpinning the work.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. Okay, Rosalind. Yeah, so taking us through the main bit of the exhibition, do you want to tell us a little bit about this piece?
This is a work by Freddie Robbins. He was actually my tutor at Royal College of Art.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
So, and has become a friend and an artist that I've worked with subsequently.
Okay.
But her work is always very fascinating because it's very much using a kind of feminine material, knit, and the kind of elements of stitching, and then subverting them in lots of different ways. And her work is very much about kind of relationships, pressures we put upon ourselves as individuals, about fear and disillusionment and disappointment in a way. I mean, and just the very fact that it's upside down and there's kind of these burgeoning, uncontainable, almost kind of creature-like.
And there's sort of weird things creeping out of the
Yeah.
body every so often, aren't there?
Yeah, and also that it's strapped in. It's kind of, you're
I mean,
upside down.
strapped in
You're-
upside down, exactly.
You can't move from that position, and this is really heavy.
Oh yeah, no, it's, yeah.
Yeah, and so again, it's sort of, I guess, my interpretation. Again, it's really depicting an upside down feelings of the world and anxieties about that as well.
And then you've got these quite delicate little sort of
Yeah,
things resting.
they're like almost
heads.
doily-like.
Yeah, doily, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and so, I mean, those are similar aspects in terms of John Stark's work.
Sure, let's see, is that?
In the sense of,
That's a little piece,
in terms of how he kind of talks about his work, is
Yeah.
similar themes, although he's depicting a very different reality,
Yeah.
one that's much more rooted in things that we might have seen on the news or or similar. So
Yeah.
this is the vampire that I mentioned in the
Yeah,
poem.
yeah. Oh, of course, yeah.
And it's kind of, it has an element of Abu Ghraib, of almost this anthropomorphic plane that's being taken away, and but also the idea that it's looking out across.
Oh, it looks out across the other things. That's really cool, isn't it?
Across the other exhibition, but particularly towards the aliens.
Is that a real plane?
Yeah,
It's a painting of a real plane. It's actually genuinely called Vampire the Plane. Is that his take on it?
It's a series that he's done called Dolpe. You can just see.
Dolpe, okay, yeah, written on the front of the truck.
Well, to be honest, it could be an interpretation of what is the real plane.
Exactly.
I haven't. It's one of those things that some things you don't question when you're choosing a work. Like, is that real? You know.
It's really cool because it's like a whale. It's got all sorts of strange.
It does. It looks like a bat. I mean, it looks like a dolphin. You know, there's a sort of aspect of that. So it's kind of, his work is very much almost sort of magical realism.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's good. Yeah. It is a bit. It's a bit alien-y as well.
Yeah.
As you say, this is. Are these the actual aliens?
Yeah, this is the alien family.
Oh really? Oh, that's one of the alien family.
So this is a work by Richard Ducker.
Okay.
So the idea of, again, the sort of relationship between the works, these aliens and other, and being outside of society is kind of a theme in the show.
Yeah.
And so Richard, has created these sort of alien families and alien visitors.
Okay.
You know, they're clustered in a particular way to essentially, it depicts a relationship of sorts. But he's very into the languages of sort of sci-fi and that sort of 1950s-esque, clunky prop-esque things. Which again are similar about displacement, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing of somebody sending me a message saying the aliens have landed in the gallery, and I kind of thought that was brilliant.
No, that's really cool. I love that alien. Actually, don't touch one. Is that bad? I won't touch it.
Don't touch it.
I only because it's polystyrene resin and cement. It's a really weird
So
combo.
and I guess as well it's that idea of this sort of spindly legs.
But these little points at the bottom,
almost
almost like pencils, incredibly long pencils.
Yeah. It also there's a relationship, I guess, to the bourgeois. But yeah, so they're very delicate actually, and the idea is, they look like concrete, but they're not, and that's the whole kind of play on it really.
They're really cool. It reminds me a bit of Barbara Hepburn's stuff. I always think Barbara Hepburn's sculptures look like aliens.
Yeah, that's true.
I think some of them in the sculpture garden, they actually just look like weird alien things.
Yeah, they're sort of, but they're anthropomorphic really. And as soon as we see things like this, we start to give it, human elements. Sort of, it's a strange thing.
They're really cool.
Yeah, we have some more hoodlums over there.
Oh yeah, more hoodlums, and these are by
these are by Kelly Sweeney.
Kelly Sweeney.
And so this is her gang. And they've all got names. So there's...
Oh really? Go on, whatever. Sorry.
Well, Bagboy, then Little Pegboy. I can't remember them off by heart.
No, of course not. Of course not.
They're just hoodlums as a collective. But I mean, Kelly is very interested in sort of other worlds and things
Sure.
that relate to other worlds, but it also has that sort of relevance to the idea of, you know, kids dressing up for Halloween and really rudimentary outfits, not like these kind of tailored things you buy. It's like, I've just put a bag over my head and I'm a ghost, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
But I just love that as well, there's sort of such a kind of confidence and skill in taking a paper bag and making it look like a character. And it's taken from remnants from her studio. Yeah, and they have so much personality.
But they look like she adores them, like they're her little friends, basically.
Yeah, well, they are.
Yeah, exactly.
They're my friends now.
Yeah, no, exactly. They look like you would give them your own little names.
Yeah.
And then you want to keep them in the room with you.
But I think it's that the very simple things that can create a kind of, again, something you can relate to and has elements of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's good. Yes,
Such
you got
ways.
a nice thing, like you said. It's really cool how the abstract things bring that humanity into what you come around. That's really nice. I like that. Yeah. So continuing on from those wonderful little creatures, which is who's this by?
Well, we move on to Hybrid by Emma Cousin.
Okay.
And what's very interesting about her work is this kind of inanimate but also animated objects, and obviously, you know, the kind of legs, the body, and how those are kind of all jumbled together. And I really liked this work in the sense that it's about relationships and how those can be where you reassemble or you try and fit into you, and you squash yourself, or you try and like keep all of these elements together as well.
Yeah, sure.
And I thought that was really fascinating, and it's very complicated relationships, and they weigh you down, but they're also things that you really want, or they're kind of wonderful days in the sunshine. You know, so it's a really
nice. It's cool. It's got like a little sort of soft foot here. This other one coming down here off the edge of the
so,
sort of cardboard box.
Yeah, the legs has become a real motif in Emma's work, for all different elements really. You know, movement and the kind of rooting of the body and things like that. But she has a fascination with legs.
And it fits into the whole Strangeland thing quite neatly.
Yeah.
It's got a quite a.
We're all kind of trying to, as well.
Nice,
I suppose it's in some ways it's a little bit as well. Like if you had to gather all your things, and you know, become a home in yourself and take all your things. That's not what her intention is, but it's sort of how I read it a bit, really.
That's cool.
And then in Joan Sigrid's, it's another kind of assembling and disassembling in another way to kind of reach her conclusion. They're taking references from art history, but they're also, of course, ambiguous, so it's predisposed. And there's a huge amount in them. In terms of their atmosphere, the body and the form, again, relating sort of between Emma and then Molly's work, and with Freddie's work, and that's sort of turning away all that ambiguity within the works themselves. And so they're more, it's not like she's trying to depict a character, they evolve over time into what eventually becomes the final work.
It's nice. I like the material. You've got the sort of bare linen at the top. You can still see that, and then you've got this. At the back, there's more impasto like painting, and then you can see the scratching over the top. It's got a really nice just textural stuff to it as well.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
That's cool.
And the textural obviously relates to Freddie, but then to Molly's work, which is also about identity. So Molly Tian, this work is called Cinnamon Gardens, and it's about thinking about her grandparents who were in Sri Lanka, and it's her kind of, her heritage is a Sri Lankan heritage, but her and her mother have been, her mother has been exiled from there, so she's never been to Sri Lanka.
She's never been there.
She's not able to go, so it's sort of bridging the gap between the memory of a space that she's never been to, kind of heard about, and recollections, and but also so obviously there's the photographs, but then it's also taking elements from her current world around her, which is Brixton. So it's kind of got elements that have taken from Brixton Market. So it's similar to John Stark's work. There's a kind of element of magical realism, and that's what she's really interested in the domestic space.
That's interesting. Is this somebody? Is that
Her grandfather.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
So
and then there's another picture of hers just over here.
Yeah, in one of the
let's
meeting rooms.
have a look at that one. So here's the other one we were talking about. So tell me a bit about this. It's quite cool. It's got like the coffee cups in it, and then here we are in the office, which has got the coffee cups and the tea. It's quite a nice installation of it.
Well, that's why we decided to put it there. I mean, it's the similar. It's the same series, so it's still the Cinnamon Gardens.
Okay.
And again, you've got obviously photographic. I mean, she graduated from printmaking from the RCA a year ago, and I actually saw this work and took her card, and it, when I was sort of shortlisting artists for this show, it had this really wonderful thing that's also about migration and identity and how we reconstruct our lives, and I think that's all really relevant. And we wanted it to work with rooms, so these are working offices during the day, places where lives and are kind of being played out in these spaces that might be about migration. It could be about sort of issues to do with identity, whatever, and so it's kind of really, really appropriate to have almost those 2D elements brought into the 3D, the mirroring, I suppose, of those things. And we had this fantastic pink, which is with all the paint that we've been using. It's sort of been born out of a kind of partnership with Little Green, a paint company. And I've been working with the manager there, and he's supplied the paint, so that we can also challenge the kind of gallery itself. And
so you've actually been changing the colour of the walls for distance work.
All the colours you've seen have been planned out carefully, and I've been doing paint samples and and putting them with the work, and then talking to the artists about how they felt about having colour. So, for example, with Richard Ducker's Aliens with the pink background, it is really, I think, it makes the work in a different sense of if it had just been in a white corner. It kind of, I wanted to up the sort of strangeness through the colours.
Oh, I see, very nice.
Yeah, the strangeness of the spaces and the works in the space through the colour as well. So that's a really great thing that we're going to kind of keep working on in terms of it changes the gallery, it changes your view. It's not what you would expect. It's not what you expect in a law firm. They're very embracing of that. Go ahead.
I think the strangeness is nice, because if you are here doing something sensible with your law firm thing, and then suddenly you're having a cup of coffee, and you look at the coffee here, it's all a little bit like you're taken into another world, aren't you? It's really cool. That's nice. And here we are in another one of the meeting rooms, and this is a fascinating piece. This would surely catch the eye of the lawyers. Is there a boy?
This is Michael Calver. And similarly to a lot of the artists, it's kind of an assimilation or dissimilation or a lot of different elements. So I guess different memories of urban or otherwise narratives pieced together. So it's like a jump more from memory. That's how he describes it.
Interesting.
So I think the context of being in a law firm where there's clearly lives being played out. Again, it has a really nice relationship to the space. So the work is chosen for the theme, but I like it when it's a double layer of possibly some of these incidents or disasters that they're going to happen. And there's another piece literally called The Incident in another one of the meeting rooms, and it's very dystopian.
It's very nicely put together, because your eye wanders all through all the different little stories and experiences or memories throughout it.
I think what's interesting coming from Molly's probably in her early 20s, and Michael is in his 70s, I think, early 70s.
Interesting.
And so we have a real age range of artists here, and that really is about having that cross-fertilisation of artists that are established and new graduates, and there isn't a sort of how we want to support artists is not just by showing established famous artists.
Of course.
It's about having those cross-fertilizations so that one group supports the other, and also bringing different generations together.
Yeah,
so it's
that's
not
nice
just
bringing
a kind
different
of
generations. It's good,
yeah. So it's not just
That makes it
about
more
who's the
exciting.
hottest 20 something
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
And so the artists really range as well in terms of new career, but people that are coming at it from a kind of second career in a way. So they've already had a first career as certain other
I see what you mean.
aspects. So
Interesting.
you know, the landscape of the art world is changing in terms of what a new graduate might be and what age that might be.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
everything.
No, that's good.
So you know, it's a wide range that we show here.
And it's interesting. I from the other shows I've seen of yours and this one, there's always, for me, there's always a sense of like there's almost a fight in all the works between reality and fantasy and imagination.
Yeah.
There's this like sort of, I don't know if it's like, but it is, there seems to be sort of, there's a lot of things that aren't quite real, but are real. And do you think that the fantasies they create for you are more real than reality?
Well, look at Alison Pilkington's.
That's really cool, the little creature in there.
I think, you know,
Giant
there is
creature.
well, reality and fiction, I think, is very subjective,
Yeah.
as we know, through kind of current news stories. And I think that we all have other dimensions, other psychological dimensions that aren't present in the world, that aren't visible to the world, that are internal. And I think what these artworks and all the shows is kind of showing that alternative or the bending of reality, which we all do in our own ways, of the bending of memory, how we all remember things differently, and that I kind of life and reality and how we all read it is sort of seems to be, in a way, one of the kind of structures of how I am thinking about the shows.
But in some ways as well, I think the interesting thing is like it's called Strangelands, but I suppose in some ways you feel what is strange within here as a healthier mental existence and like a sort of Trump world.
I hope so. I think what I like as well within the context of this being a law firm is that people are coming here to resolve things essentially or find a solution, and which we're all trying to do. And I like the fact that, you know, lives are being played out in these spaces, and that they might relate to some of the works here, and they're somebody who might be disassembling their life or reassembling their life and trying to find a way forward. And so that really, I guess, impacts upon the way I see curating here. Is a kind of nod to those things, and that active life is going on here. And you know, in other shows, this, you know, this once we had a show in here, and this room was for extradition in a very expansive and philosophical way, and another room was about counterfeiting, which is things that might be addressed here in these rooms. So, you know, again, when you're in a law firm, there's two people's sides of the story, which is the reality, which is the fact. It's the alternative fact. You know,
that's interesting, actually.
so I that really fuels me, I think.
I think that's quite interesting. I think a lot of people would have not had the sensitivity or insight to think about what might take in law firms. They might have just thought law firms are these faceless places. But it's interesting to see. You can see that people are coming into law firm. It is about their lives and what happens to them, and it affects them. And I think it's quite nice to see all these as like different solutions.
Yeah. And I think for me as well, I think interesting there are crossovers between artists and lawyers.
Oh, there are.
Yeah, there's, you know, everyone's problem solving, like that's the collective thing. We're all problem solving. We all have to be creative about that problem solving. We have to kind of take different approaches. We have to keep going and kind of get past obstacles, whatever those may be. And I do see them as, you know, as kind of interesting dualities as well. You know, finding a balance. As an artist, as an artist, that might be composition. As a lawyer, that's a balance between two people's different needs. You know, mediation and things like that. So I can't. It feels very. The shows are very layered. It's not just a gallery and a law firm. It's what the law firm does here. So that's really important to me too.
Very interesting. Well, guys, it has been fascinating coming around Strangelands with Rosalind. It's been wonderful for Rosalind to actually show us around and give us the experience. I would absolutely heartily recommend you come here. It's a fascinating show. And it is a nice, strange world, a strange land to enter into, with all sorts of, I think it's called Strangelands, but I would say it's kind of like positive, exciting lands, opportunities, different solutions, different ways to see the world, and, you know, a celebration of imagination and expression and everything you could possibly want. Not to be dragged down into a Trump existence, but let your imagination run free. So please, come and see the show.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really
We'd
good.
love to see you.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
cheerio guys. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bumbuckler.